of this pandemic, and doctors and scientists like yourself, maybe, who are much more optimistic and relaxed even about the present and future of COVID because of the vaccines?
Yes, I mean, I think this is a point in the pandemic where people are calling for metrics or what are called off-ramps for restrictions. And I've been calling for that for some time based on hospitalization rates, based on vaccination rates. As early as April of last year, wrote a piece in the Washington Post with Ashish Jha and others about those being the two metrics, your immunity and hospitalization rates that can tell us when we can lift restrictions.
So timing is an issue here in this debate, of course. We all want to see an end to the pandemic and restrictions. Does it make sense to be talking at this moment in time about the need for off-ramps, quote unquote, an end to mask mandates and, quote, as you put it, going back to living the way we used to, when more than 2,000 Americans are still dying every day, sometimes more than 3,000? Some might say that's kind of offensive to the families of the dead to have that conversation right now.
I think if you do not prepare people for the fact that this virus will be endemic, you're actually doing a great disservice. And what I mean by prepare is that Europe and the UK have had more realistic commentary about what will it take? What is the right number of hospitalizations you can expect with COVID that would allow you to go back to normal? I think it's actually very unrealistic and been unfair to think we can eradicate COVID by our behavior. I think that's actually been the problem with the debate for the last 2 years. We can't eradicate it, not because we're not good enough, not because we haven't been as humans masked enough or kept things closed enough, but because of the properties of the virus, which are animal reservoirs, pre-symptomatic transmission, non-sterilizing immunity increasingly from the vaccines, and the fact that the virus looks like other pathogens. And preparing people for the endemicity phase of the pandemic is the right approach. In fact, I think it's wrong to think that you can eradicate it. I think that's unrealistic.
Dr. Gandhi, isn't that a little bit of a straw man? Because most people are not saying eradicate it or zero deaths. They're saying a 9/11 every day is bad. It's not a time to be talking about normalization. Over 3,000 dead yesterday.
Yeah, so I think it's fair to say this. You need hospitalization metrics for when you can live with it in a respiratory pathogen. And I think, again, wrote about that in April and then in the New York Times in a couple of months ago. So what's that hospitalization metric? You're right. In many areas, we're nowhere near that. In the state of California, we're very much there because we have such high levels of vaccination. California, 40 million people. Our state looks like Denmark in terms of 81% vaccination rate. So I think it may depend on where you live in the country. We're almost restricting the vaccinated and restricting highly vaccinated places to make up for the fact that Americans did not get vaccinated the rate we wanted to. So you see how we're 50 different places.
I think we can agree on the failure on the vaccination front. You have consistently said that COVID isn't that big a risk to kids, that the risk isn't big enough to justify some of the restrictions we see in schools. This is what Dr. Mark Klein, physician-in-chief at Children's Hospital New Orleans, said to me last summer during the Delta surge about whether kids are low risk.
Well, that was a myth from the beginning, but it's particularly not true now. This Delta variant of COVID-19 has been a game changer. We are seeing many ill children. The prevalence rate of COVID among our outpatients coming to clinic has increased from 1% 1 month ago to 7% and now to about 20%. And we have 18 children in the hospital today, 6 in the intensive care unit with a diagnosis of COVID-19.
What is your response to Dr. Klein, who is one of the nation's top pediatricians?
Yes, I completely agree that children can get COVID, but talking about risk stratification, that children are much less at risk, which actually for 2 biological reasons. One is younger children don't have the ACE receptor, so they're not able to imbibe the virus as well. And the second has to do with their innate immune response. Talking about risk stratification, that older people are much more at risk of COVID than younger people, is valid. It's an epidemiologic valid statement. And in fact, other countries had longer periods of their schools being open because they acknowledged this risk stratification. So you had to keep children safe, you have to keep adults safe. But in any field of infectious disease, you keep those who are most at risk for an infection more safe than those who are less at risk. I don't think that's unreasonable. Yeah.
Dr. Gandhi, one of the big criticisms of you is that you make these sweeping and very optimistic predictions, and they just don't pan out. I just want to run through some of them tonight so you can respond. Bear with me. I'll read them out, and then I'll have you respond. You said last February, a month before India's horrific second wave began, killing hundreds of thousands, if not millions, quote, India now has herd immunity. Last March, pre-Delta and Omicron here in the US, you said, I genuinely, with all my heart, apologize for anyone who continues to try to scare you about variants. In May, you gave not one, but 7 reasons why we won't need boosters. Also in May, you said by June 15th, California, your state, would get to herd immunity. In June itself, you said not to have doom about Delta. In July, you said what we know about the Delta variant is reassuring. You said in September, I truly think we are in the end game. By mid-October, we will be in a manageable place. And you said in December, Omicron won't swamp hospitals in vaccinated areas. It did. At what point, Dr. Gandhi, do you say, maybe I should stop making predictions about a pandemic that I keep getting dangerously wrong?
Yes, I think that you are not in my region in California. So I live in a highly vaccinated and highly immune region. I'm working in the hospital now. That's why I'm wearing this. And no, our hospitals were not swamped because of our high levels of immunity in a region that had high levels of vaccination. That was actually true with the Delta variant as well, because we had about a 78% vaccination rate prior to Delta. So we were able to manage our hospitalizations. So it could be the difference between a highly vaccinated place and a lower vaccinated place, and 50 different countries and 50 different responses. But yes, I was very wrong about India, and I actually apologized multiple times in a public forum that I was certainly wrong about that.
But the problem is, and look, people get things wrong. I think your critics say you've got a lot of things wrong. And I appreciate humility is the right way with a disease that's, made a lot of people wrong over the last year or two. But the problem is your critics say you made all these predictions on herd immunity, on Omicron, on variants. And then you said last month, again, I think this will be the last wave for a while. If you're humble, if you know you got things, why not stop making these sweeping predictions? We don't know if it's the last wave for a while. You can't say that. And why would people believe you when you were wrong before?
Yeah, I guess it depends on, I apologize. I will try not to make any more predictions. Thank you.
And one last question. Isn't the problem, and look, optimism is a good thing. We all need optimism in our lives. But again, the critics would say it's not just optimism in a pandemic where thousands of people are dying. There's a flippancy as well when it comes to some of these predictions. I just want to play this clip from a podcast you were on last year when you were asked about variants. Have a listen.
Even with variants, if they're going to be setting against, because the variants are the new bugaboo, right? Like, we always knew there was mutations. That's what coronaviruses do. All viruses do that. But the thing is, if the vaccines are effective against severe disease, which they are, even against the Brazilian variant.
Yes. I really need to say something. I need to say variants, schmariants. Okay, I'm sorry. I don't know.
Given how many people have died at the hands of the Delta and Omicron variants, do you regret saying that?
I regret saying yes. I regret saying that. But I will tell you that, again, in highly vaccinated places like my own, the Delta variant did not swamp hospitals because of what's called T-cell immunity. It's what's called our immunity and our protection from severe disease. So we had very high cases, but low hospitalizations in places from the Delta variant. But I'm lucky because I live in a highly vaccinated region, and I live in a place where we took the vaccines. So I live in San Francisco, and no, our hospitals were not.
I'm not disagreeing with it. It's more the laughing and the giggling about variants, which have now killed so many people. It's more that, looking back on it now.
I think it's really, yes. Okay, I'm sorry. I will not do that again. I really think it's terribly important to understand the immune system and how well protected you are from the vaccines, from variants, because of the in-breath robust response across the spike protein, even from spike protein vaccines. I think it's so important to understand that. But I don't think I can explain it on this program.
We certainly agree on the importance of vaccinations. Dr. Monica Gandhi, I appreciate you coming on the show and taking my questions. Thank you so much. Coming up, remember when President Trump said that COVID cases in the US would quickly drop to 0? That was around 2 years ago. That prediction didn't fare so well. My next guest asks, will there be accountability for any of the leaders who mishandled this pandemic? Back after a short break.